Hello, welcome to our sermon time now. We're looking at a very strange passage today. Um, you just heard it in our scripture reading. But I'm not sure anybody really understands exactly what Jesus means here. And it's a reminder that originally scripture was not written down, it was a word of mouth. And what would happen in community is the rabbi, the teacher, would throw the pebble out, and then other rabbis, it would depend on, of course, the community, but the other people there would then give their impression. And I think that the spirit of that is that we're all teachers to one another. And so I'm going to throw the pebble in the pond, and then if you're so inclined to leave a comment on Facebook or on the YouTube conversation there. And also, if you're watching this before 10:45 on Sunday, August the 2nd, we're going to have a conversation by Zoom, and you can find that on our website, where you can bounce back, you can disagree, you can agree, whatever, on this passage to turn the other cheek. Let me read the passage again, just because it is so very, very strange. You've heard it said, an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. And sometimes that reads as do not resist evil. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek as well. And it goes on. If anyone wants to sue you, take your shirt. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, you go 2 miles. Ask anyone who gives. Give to anyone who asks of you. Now that's very strange. And the eye for eye, tooth for tooth was, of course, the Levitical code. It was intended to limit revenge. It wasn't saying you had to poke somebody's eye out if they poked your eye out, but it was saying if you want retribution, stop at the level of the injury. So if it's an eye, a tooth, whatever it is, you do that revenge, but then you stop it at that point. It's, the code of Hammurabi had the same kind of level. And the intent was not to seek vengeance, but to limit vengeance. Martin Luther King famously said, an eye for an eye makes the whole world sightless. He was quoting Mahatma Gandhi, of course, that idea of nonviolent resistance. And I think that's one way of understanding what this passage means. But I think Malcolm X is always a good commentary on Martin Luther King, and I think Martin Luther King is always a good commentary on Malcolm X, because life is very complicated, and there's no one set of rules that you can just go on autopilot and obey. This is what Malcolm X said. And I think he's talking about Dr. King here. He says, I think that any black man who teaches black people to turn the other cheek and suffer peacefully after they've been turning the cheek and suffering peacefully for 400 years in a land of bondage under the most cruel, inhumane, and wicked slave master that any people have ever been under. He is doing those people an injustice, and he's a traitor to his own people. Now, there's a lot of passion in that, and you might even say imbalance. I'm not sure at the end of his life if Malcolm X would have said it exactly the same way. But there's a truth there, a very important truth, that whatever this means, turn the other cheek, it cannot be a call for the victims of abuse to not try to get out of that situation. Malcolm X would say, by any means necessary. But there are times when the violence is already there. And religion surely should not mean to go on autopilot and just pretend like that's not happening. We would never do that with our own children. If somebody's being abusive to our children, we're going to stop them, as Malcolm X says, by any means necessary. And there's no hatred behind it necessarily, but it's protecting people. But it's not reactive. Once we become reactive, then we start losing control. Once somebody's pushing our buttons, we start losing control. And I think that's where the Dr. King and the Malcolm X understanding can kind of come together. I want to suggest that probably 99% of Christians do not believe in turning the other cheek. We believe we should turn the other cheek, but that's not the American way. And there's so many, you remember the song Kenny Rogers sang of everyone considered him the coward of the county because his father taught him to turn the other cheek. And then his young wife gets raped by the villains of the town, and the final crescendo is sometimes you have to fight if you're a man. And that's, I think, what we really believe. I used to watch a show when I was a kid called Kung Fu, and it was kind of a Western. Some of you are maybe old enough to remember that, but the guy would do peaceful lessons and talk all this beautiful poetry all through it until the end, in which he always beats somebody up. So it's, I think we have some work to do on understanding this, and I'm the first to say I'm not 100% sure what Jesus said, but I think there's a principle here. There's a church in Dallas, a very large church, that recently sang the anthem, Make America Great Again. And this is a statement by their senior pastor in a sermon. He said, when I'm looking for a leader who's going to fight ISIS and keep America secure, I don't want some meek and mild leader or somebody who's going to turn the other cheek. Now that's amazing. That is amazing for a Christian pastor to get up and say, I'm going to teach you this turn the other cheek stuff, but that's when you don't have power. When you have power or there's something on the line, I don't want that. I want somebody who fights dirty. So we have some work to do in understanding where Jesus is coming from. Another religious authority in our country, I'm sure you've heard about it, is insulted Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez by calling her a very offensive, sexist name. And in the true spirit of self-deceptive religion, this was his apology that he gave. He said, the offensive name-calling words attributed to me by the press were never spoken to my colleagues. He didn't say he didn't say it. He said, I didn't say it to her. I said it behind her back, so I'm innocent. And he said, if they were construed that way, I apologize for their misunderstanding. I'm sorry you're so stupid. Then he says, and this is what makes the apology, this is perfect non-apology stuff. He said, but I cannot apologize for my passion or for loving my God, my family, my country. I cannot apologize for my passion or for my loving my God, my family, my country. So the reason I called her a sexist name is because I love God so much. That's the kind of self-deception that we're trying to work through in this teaching of Jesus. It's not something we want to hear. Whatever Jesus means by it is not something that we are predisposed to agree with. But I think it really helps to realize Jesus is speaking more profoundly, more deeply, and not literally. Karl Marx used this passage to dismiss Christianity. He said the social principles of Christianity preach cowardice, self-contempt, abasement, submissiveness, and humbleness. Now, if you just mechanically apply turn the other cheek, he's correct. Right? That means that you have to surrender control of your life to cruelty, to ignorance, and these kinds of things, and to not resist it. I want to suggest that Jesus is exaggerating in this whole part of the Sermon on the Mount with every topic that he goes through. When he says, It's not enough not to kill somebody. That's what you've heard. Don't kill. But what I'm telling you is if you get angry, if you call somebody a name, you're already on your way to hell. Well, we could close shop, right? I mean, and when he says, if you look at someone with lust, pluck your eye out, it's better. I mean, obviously, I'd be having eye patches and wouldn't be using my hands as much. So clearly what's being talked about is more profound than what we're hearing at the literal level. Jesus is like a Zen master here. And what he's talking about is something, it's like talking about the one hand clapping. There's a principle here that is very profound. But it's not, again, it's not literal. It's a kind of spiritual judo where if somebody is trying to trigger you and push your buttons, you've got the capacity to let that go. That your peace of mind does not rely on the maturity of others. One very big clue that you can't see in English that jumps out at you in Greek is the word for strike here is an open hand. It's a slap. It's not a fist. It's a slap. Now that may or may not be important, but to me what that means is it's talking about insult, not injury. It's talking about indignity, not something that's debilitating, something that's an assault. I don't think Jesus is saying if somebody comes at you with a baseball bat, take your hat off so they'll have a better shot. I think what it's saying is don't let your own peace of mind and love become casualties of indignities and insults. I mean, those are bad enough as they are. I don't think he's saying you have to ignore injury. Even if it means it for yourself, justice requires that we protect other people, I think. So what I believe Jesus is talking about is a kind of emotional judo where we learn the capacity to let go of things that are throwing our heart off balance, things that are robbing us of peace and joy. This commandment, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. In the desert, without government, without police, that's the best they could do, right? It's limit your revenge to the injury that was done to you. Again, this is in the Code of Hammurabi too. But let's see. It's very important to realize that the person we're talking about here, that Jesus is the same person that's going to knock over the tables of the money changers. There's nothing in it that says he was violent against the people. But he is not being a sheep here. Quite the opposite. There's more power in his response because he's not being triggered. There's something about human nature that, we see it in children all the time where a child will hit another child and the other child will hit them back. And then the first child will go tell the parent, well, I hit him, but he hit me harder than I hit him. Our notions of justice, it always feels like the other person has hurt us worse than we have hurt them. And so we can't follow the eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, because we don't have a good sense of what balance is. So the way Dr. King talked about it, I think is beautiful. It's that returning evil for evil, returning violence for violence, sets up this kind of vortex. And we lose control of our own life. We lose control of our own hearts. And I think that's a huge part of understanding, at least at the personal level, what Jesus is talking about here. I think he's also talking about a revolutionary energy that will change the world. But we have to start where we are. And I think realizing that keeping peace in our own heart requires a kind of judo, a kind of being able to let go. The word forgive in Greek means to cut off, to let it go. And I think that's an important thing to remember. I think it's similar to what Marcus Aurelius used to say, and that is the best revenge is not to be like the person who did the injury. So if you're traumatized by the leadership of this nation, the very first part of the revolution is to stop being like that. Discover where you also have let capitalism rob your heart, and nationalism, and white supremacy, and patriarchy. What is the purging that each of us needs to do in our own heart so that we become expressions of the kind of love that the world is looking for? If we want happiness and peace, this is an essential lesson. Whether or not it helps the world, I think it does, but if I want peace in my heart, I have to stop reopening the wound by seeking revenge and not letting things go, by carrying them with me. One of the best teachers of that was John Lewis, who passed away recently. During the funeral, former President Obama spoke of him. And I think this was a great statement of somebody, he believed in nonviolence, but he also provoked tension in the system. He didn't just go along. He wasn't passively nonviolent. It was an assertive type of nonviolence. And this is the way former President Obama put it. He said, "It is a great honor to be back in Ebenezer Baptist Church." He says, "in the pulpit of its greatest pastor, Dr. Martin Luther King, to pay my respects to perhaps his finest disciple, an American whose faith was tested again and again to produce a man of pure joy and unbreakable perseverance." See, not just that he fought for justice, but he also lived out love. To produce a man of pure joy and unbreakable perseverance. If I want joy in my heart, I have to let go of the things that just trigger it and rob it. There are things that threaten my being, my existence. There are things that threaten the justice and rights of other people, and we can't let those go. At the same time, to not become reactive, to hold on to peace and joy, but also compassion, even for the person who injures, is a way of keeping our peace and joy intact. I mentioned Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the insult that she suffered. Did you see her response to that? I think that's what we're going to study tomorrow in Conversations of Living, because it really is embodying that balance between Dr. King and Malcolm X. She says, in using that language, the sexist language, insulting, vulgar sexist language that this person used, in using that language in front of the press, he gave permission to use that language against his wife, his daughters, women in his country. And I'm here to stand up to say it is not acceptable. I do not care what your views are. It does not matter how much I disagree, or how much it incenses me, or how much I feel that people are dehumanizing others. This is the key point I want to get across. She says, I will not do that myself. I will not allow people to change and create hatred in our hearts. Do you hear that? This other person has insulted her. And she says, I will not do that myself. I will not allow people to change and create hatred in our hearts. If you saw her apology, you saw something very civil, but it was also devastating. If she had responded in kind, if she called him a bad name, this would have been forgotten before the week is over. Her breakdown of his false apology, her diagnosis of what that meant, was, I believe, prophetic. And I think it's going to be studied 100 years from now. It did not come from hatred. It was not reactive. It was loving, but it was very, very uncomfortable. It was an invitation for this person to stop being abusive. And again, I'm not 100% sure what Jesus means in this turn the other cheek stuff. I've heard a lot of guesses and interpretations. But I think for you and me in this coming week, what it means is that we are going to go out into a week where we can expect indignities, insults, things that could deprive us of our peace of mind. I think what Jesus is saying to us, finally, is to make a promise to our hearts as we go out into this week that we will let go of whatever triggers us, whatever might trap us in the past. And we will promise our hearts to live this week in compassion, in peace, and in joy. And that is my hope for you and I as we go out into this week. Thank you so much for being with us. I invite you now to your own reflections on these words. Thank you.